Piet Brauer, and he's going to talk us about DevOps in the iOS world. So, have luck.
Thanks. First I have to stop. Can we turn it down a bit? It's very loud. So yeah, hey, let's talk about DevOps in the iOS world. Who heard of DevOps before? Like a hashtag or something? Okay, cool. So if you're familiar with hashtags, you will be pretty familiar with this talk. But first off, who am I? I'm pretty nervous, and I'm also Piet, and I'm an indie from Hamburg, which is in Germany. And I make an app called Git2Go. Some of you are already testing it. It's basically a Git client for iOS, so you can clone repositories and make changes and commit that back. So that's a bit of advertising here. But you might ask yourself, wait, what? Why is an indie talking about large team organization? Like, why? Like, who is he? I worked at Xing before. If you're not familiar with Xing, it's a business social network from Hamburg in Germany. That's why I moved there. And I worked there for about 2 years. And I helped scaling the team from 4-person team or 2-person team, it varied a bit, to now 16, I think, across multiple locations. So what we did there was like splitting a code base, just like SoundCloud did it. Yeah. So, and there I learned a bit. So this talk is basically divided in 3 hashtags. First is DevOps, then it's iOS DevOps, and then it's practical iOS DevOps. So you might want to check the character limit if you want to tweet about it. First, a bit of history. DevOps doesn't really have a clear statement what it is really. It's just people talking about it in conferences. And there was an Agile conference in 2008, which first, it was a different name, which I can't remember right now, but they basically came up with a concept. And there were also a lot of talks, especially from Flickr, that got a lot of attention in 2009, and I will talk about it later. In 2008, 2009, there was still large web applications, so it was from a time where you had months of release cycles, like you would develop a feature for 6 months and then ship it, and everything would break because the environment you developed it on and the environment the QA tested it on was different from the production environment, because people were, like especially ops side, not very used to use source control. So they just manually configured the servers and it wouldn't match. And it was just a big mess. So the basic idea was to bring together the developer side and the operations side. So DevOps. You can add an extra S if you want. But and basically, what it should result in is we should ship faster and more often. And if we have the history, we now have the current iOS situation, which is months of release cycles. You deploy from your local machine. And there's very low automation. Like, it's expanding, but still it's very low compared to the server side, because they have a head start of like 6 or 7 years. And I read a book about it, which I will talk about later, and it defines basically the 3 ways how to achieve DevOps. And you have to achieve one way after another. So it's not all 3 ways at once, it's just one after another. And yeah, it's just the guidelines. And you will hear the 3 ways a lot, so this is the first one, which is named systems thinking. And it basically describes that you should think about the performance of the entire system around you, that surrounds you, right? What do you have to do to ship? And it includes all your dependencies, including design and QA and Apple even, and also your customers. So that's the first way. There's a second one. It's called amplifying feedback. And it's basically about shorten and amplify feedback, so make it more prominent. And understanding and responding to your customers, or and internal and external stakeholders. So really talk to each other. And the third way is the culture of continual experimentation and learning. And this one is basically the coolest one of them, but you first have to achieve the other two. So no fun until the work is done. It's about taking risks, learning from failures, and understand your system and the thing you do through repetition. And yeah, just practice, practice, practice. And it's also, it encouraged going deeper into danger than you ever been before. So make a lot of experiments and get practice getting out of trouble too. Like if your experiment fails, yeah, you convert to Swift and it didn't work out, then you get practice getting out of it too. So it embraces that. And which it should result in is the improvement of your daily work and creating rituals, like when an error occurs, we know what to do. Like we are working together instead of everyone is like waving and screaming and running through the room because something went wrong or your app is crashing, for example. And it also embraces introducing faults into the system so you get more practice. So it doesn't say like lean back if everything is cool, you mastered the first 2 ways, so I can lean back and my app is fine. But it's really introducing faults. And you can see that it comes from the server side because they have a lot of outages. If they developed a feature and shipped it, there were like 1 day outage where you can't get money. So that's fortunately, that's not the case on iOS, but you still have live bugs, right? Like people are, you shipped, for example, a new activity feed, for example, and then the users tap on it and the app crashes for some reason. Like, and you have to recover from that. And this is the third way. So coming to the second hashtag already, it's iOS DevOps. We have the first way, which is systems thinking. And as I said, it's understanding the surroundings. So that includes UX, your UI, your product owner or product team, your development team, which you will sit in, I think. Your quality assurance, may it be external or internal. It includes the App Store and Apple, like the review team, because that is in between you and shipping. And it also includes the very other side, your customers. And as I said, it's all the dependencies. If you don't really know what you should think of your system, think about what's going on if we have a new feature. For example, like waiting for new assets and waiting for review, that all counts in. Amplifying feedback for iOS developers. How can you do that? It's, for example, review of new designs. It's this is basically between you and your designers, or the product side and the designers. Like, I don't like this thing, or we can't build it because this and that. It's also between product and your customer, so leave out the dev side completely through integrated feedback or messaging, or like your customer can contact you and you respond to him. But it's also from product to customer, not only from customer to product. It's having clear App Store release notes. Your customer doesn't care about minor improvements and performance optimization, or what's it called? I haven't written it, but he don't care. If he submits a bug report, then he wants to see, okay, this bug was fixed. So it's like, we fixed that issue, thank you. So that's, for example, or between QA and dev through continuous integration, like the guys at SoundCloud do, and continuous deployment, and also continuous testing. But we will go into tools and how to do it in a bit more detail. And then we have the third way, which is culture of continual experimentation and learning. So it's try out new technologies once in a while, try Swift, try Reactive Cocoa, like all the stuff. You don't have to build it into your app, but just learn from it. Like, for example, with the modularization, which we did, we just did it. we had this idea in our mind for a long time, but no one actually did it until someone was keen enough to do it. Practice through just submit every 2 weeks to the App Store. That's totally possible. For example, the guys at Flickr, when they gave the talk at the conference, so like, we are shipping 10 times plus a day, which was totally awesome at that time. Like, people were sitting in the audience like, wow, you must have a lot of outages. So, yeah, it's really practice, practice, practice. But that might be still a little abstract, so I made some case studies, which I hashtagged Practical iOS DevOps. And it's the first way. It's systems thinking, and I wrote it down for my time at Xing. I'm now an indie developer, but still have the knowledge. That's the system I worked in. I try to understand the relationships. Like, you have your product owner, and you also have your UI designer, you have your UX designer, if you have one. You have internal IT. Like, I worked in a framework group, so I had to deal with Jenkins and networking and blah, blah, blah. So I had to deal with internal IT. I also had to deal with operations, and also with the feature teams and the platform team and Apple, because I submitted it. And as this is very, like, not so pleasant to watch it, I made a diagram with me in the middle. So that's an egocentric diagram of the system around me. And as you can see, there are a lot of things going on. Like, there are a lot of arrows going in both directions, mostly. And you can see that there is an API team, which I didn't list before because it didn't fit on the slide. So they were talking to basically everyone. Like, everyone uses an API to display stuff in their app, right? So they have to talk to feature teams and to the platform team and also to me. And I talked to the feature and platform teams and also to the API team. And I talked to the ops and the IT and Apple, and the PO talked to Apple because he was submitting release notes, and it just goes on and on and on. And that's a very complex, big system. And if you want to ship fast, you have to understand it and streamline the processes in between all your dependencies. So an advice would be, try to replace humans with machines as much as you can. Like, for example, the IT and ops side, you just need once. And you can cut them off completely. You can do it yourself, and you have 2 dependencies less. If this doesn't work because they have domain knowledge, for example, with the feature or platform teams, you can integrate persons from them into your team, right? If you need a lot of IT support, a lot of ops support, you can bring them into your team. Just one person who is dedicated to your team and does it for you. That's basically what the DevOps thing is, right? You bring together dev and ops in one team, and they work on the same features at the same time. And for example, another thing, if IT and ops is too abstract for you, bring in your own UI and UX designers instead of having a design team that sits in its cubicle, 4 people, and just designs the whole thing. Bring in dedicated people that deal with your app all the time. So you get instant feedback, and that brings me to the next point. How can I amplify feedback? That's very, for me, it's very abstract. Like, I can imagine a speaker, but that doesn't really fit. So it's shorten your feedback loop, and this is what you also do in Agile, right? You have this feedback loop that goes into retrospective and planning, and this goes on. So how can I shorten the feedback loop, and with whom? Like, shorten the feedback loop between you and your tests. It's not just people, it's also your code. So get instant feedback if you broke something through continuous integration and continuous deployment. Get also feedback from humans on your code through pull requests, for example. And if you don't have QA, then write KIF tests or with UI automation that taps through your app, or use Frank or don't use it. Depends on how keen you are. So get feedback from your code. Build a linter, which is like pretty cool. Or you can shorten the feedback loop between you and Apple, which most people don't do or realize that it's actually possible to shorten the feedback loop between them and Apple, because Apple is like this black box. You never see anyone from them unless you pay $2,500 a year, and then you can actually meet them. But you can upload often and release often. You can, the iTunes Connect linter is actually pretty cool. So you can submit your app, and then you have to wait this, I don't know, timer, 10, 15 minutes. And you see if you use private APIs or not. Instead, if you submit an app after 4 months of development, and then you suddenly realize, damn it, the dependency we integrated using a private API, and we can't submit it, so we have to roll back, and this is basically an outage, so you can't ship, right? That prevents you from shipping. But if you submit every 2 weeks and have everything feature switched, for example, you get feedback like every second week. You can also just release often to your customers and release MVPs, have feature switches in them, and just ship your feature to a small set of group. You can have just to your employees, because they won't use your beta version, because it's not that simple as downloading it from the App Store, for example. And really just automate all the things. The time you spend on uploading should be like 0. You should push to the branch or just push a button, that's it. And tools you can use is Fastlane tools, for example. I don't know if it's Fastlane or Fastlane tools. So the domain is fastlane.tools, so I wrote it down like that. Or Shenzhen directly, or use TestFlight, because it's the release config. You can be really sure that it's the same as your customer downloads it and tests your app. So you can actually shorten the feedback loop between you and Apple without emailing anyone. You can also shorten the feedback loop, as I said before, between you and your customer, and get feedback of your app and give them feedback to customers, to your customer. And try to keep the response time under 2 hours. That's a very abstract thing, but if they have to wait for response for 1 or 2 days, they're not going to be very happy and give you bad feedback, which you don't respond to. So that's like really try to be as engaging as possible. And I use, in Git2Go, I use Support Kit, which is free for 100,000 euros, 100,000 users, not euros, a month. So, and it integrates perfectly with Slack. Like everyone is using Slack, I have the feeling. But it just, if it's an in-app chat, so you type in a message, or your customer types in a message, and you get a Slack notification and can respond in Slack to your customer, and they will get a push notification about your feedback. And I tried it in the beta, and it worked really well. Like, still 90% of the questions were, what's the support system? But that's like just because it's developer-focused app. So it just works, and it's really, really cool. Or you could try Mail if you're a big company and don't use Slack, but really try to be as short on response as possible. You could even hire an external people that deals with it for you, because you're in the middle of something and don't have 5 minutes to respond to the email, because, I mean, it's email, right? Shorten the feedback loop between you and the designer through prototypes. Try out new things, new animations, which most of the people love. I don't, but people seem to like animations. So give them hints what's realistic in their prototype, because it's very easy to click it through in the prototype, but it's actually hard to do. So give them feedback as early as possible, not like your product owner or your designer comes up with some crazy idea and it only talks to design people, and they also like that it's a very good idea, and then you actually get it into your sprint, or it basically comes up in the planning, and you say like, I don't really know that this is possible. Like, I don't think it's possible. So give them feedback as early as possible, and really try to educate your designers to talk to you. Because like, they won't talk to me, but because I'm very like pushy. They have to get used to some no's, but be as kind as possible. And you can use it yourself if you have App Cooker, for example. It's a very nice app. You can click your prototypes through it and then load it onto your smartphone. You can try out new things and actually convince your product owner of new features. So give them feedback as well. There's some examples. I think you're all smart enough to think further. But coming to the third way of practical iOS DevOps, it's culture of continual experimentation and learning. And that is automate all the tasks, introduce release cycles, and get used to upload once a week. I'd say twice a week, but that's very arbitrary number. Just upload. Just get a feeling of uploading something. And streamline your QA process, because if you ship every week, you see that 1.5 days for QAing your app is not going to be very efficient, because your QA guy, or girl, I don't know, guy is, yeah, that's okay, has to actually test your features still, right? And he also has to test the whole app if you release. So we streamlined a lot. Like when we started with the 2 weeks release cycle, we had 1.5 days, as I said, release testing. And then after like 5 or 6 releases, they realize that it's taking a lot of time, especially if they find something and then it's rejected and then you have to do it again. So it's 3 days. And then they came up with some processes around it, and now it's just half a day or a day, so at least. Yeah. And as I said, remove humans from every process as possible. Like, spend your time developing and not submitting to the App Store waiting for something to lint it. And then I was about to write a conclusion, but I rewatched the talk from 2009 from the Flickr guys, and they had some pretty nice points there. And it actually applies to iOS as well. So we have to come from a point where we find automation obscure. Like, when I tell people that Airport Quiz or Git2Go is fully automated, just I have to push to a branch and it's deployed, and then I can download it, but I'm already on the way to somewhere else and don't have to actually wait for it, they find like, that's funny, like, you're an indie, why you do that? You can just upload it. But in a server world, or a server-side world, it's not that much obscure, and we have to find the way too. Like, from finding automation obscure to finding no automation obscure. Like, you're not automating your App Store upload, why are you doing that? Like, what's the point? And if they come with like money and blah, then just tell them that waiting for iTunes is also an expensive activity. They also talked about shared version control system. That doesn't really apply too much to iOS, but if you have some outside people like your QA, let them access your repository and check in their stuff as well, because it belongs to your app. They also had this one-step build and deploy. That's also very applicable. Just I have a production branch, but you can also just have a button in Jenkins or your CI where you just push it and then it's uploaded. But I prefer the branching thing, because then you have the history of what you actually shipped. Add feature flags like SoundCloud did. You can, if you release every other week, you have to make sure that your unfinished features aren't visible, right? So use feature flags. It's very simple. It can be Sinatra app that sits somewhere, depending on how many users you have, or just a JSON that sits somewhere. It could be static, so you don't need any server side for it. But feature flag all the things, like really. Spotify is doing it pretty cool, and we also started using it a lot. Share your metrics. Like, you all have to integrate analytics into your app, right? Be it Google Analytics or Omniture or I don't know. But share your analytics thing. It's not about page visit, but for example, Google Analytics has some great features like error. You can, like, every time you throw an error, you can report it to Google Analytics and see how many of your users are experiencing errors. So that could be a hint what's what's going on in your app. Use Hockey app, use a crash reporter. Please don't use iTunes Connect crash reporting because it doesn't work. It's just like that, and especially if you're not uploading from Xcode, because then your app won't even show up. Like you can't exit it anywhere. So use Hockey app or Crashlytics or something else, but please don't use iTunes Connect for that. Build Slack bots like GitHub or HipChat or what were you using? Yeah, something like that. They have Hubot. They like everything is integrated into their chat system. The guys at Flickr 7 years ago had an IRC channel where everything was logged. Like every deployment was logged into the channel and everyone knew what's going on. And really use robots for everything. But DevOps is not only a technical thing, it's also culture. And to achieve it, you have to have respect in your team, especially if you bring in other people and not just developers. You have to respect each other. Like, it's not the dumb designer that designs something and think it will fly, but he's an expert on his level. That's why you hired this guy. So have respect for him. And also trust him and trust the other guys. If you give a task to someone else, then you have to trust him that he's accomplishing it, right? And not just sneaking around him and just let him do his thing and trust him. And also develop a healthy attitude about failure, because you will have a lot of failures in the beginning. That's the whole point of doing that. And just avoid blame. Like, if someone does an error, that's okay, but don't blame him on that, because it could also happen to you, depending. Yeah. It could also happen to you, I think. Yeah. So yeah, further reading. I just wanted to bring in the topic and not just talk about server-side, but also how you can apply it to iOS. And there's a really great novel. It's actually a novel, so I really enjoyed reading it. It's called The Phoenix Project, and it's a novel about IT, DevOps, and helping a business win. It's an occasion title, I think, but it's really engaging, and I enjoyed really reading it. And there's this talk from John Alsbaugh and Paul Hammett, which is called 10 plus deploys per day. It's from the Diversity conference in 2009. So I really recommend watching it. Yeah, and thanks. And let's have some wine. I had one already, but I could have another one now. You can find me on Twitter or GitHub at Piet Brauer. It's my full name. It's also on my badge. That's there. So now we have time for Q&A. Thank you.
So my question is, how do you handle the review times on uploading? Because we had the problem, we thought, okay, we want to upload every week, but then Apple was like, oh, 12 days review time, and you can't upload another binary then, and our build breaks. Right. So how do you handle this?
Right now you can upload multiple versions with test flight. So your build doesn't break, but still you can submit only one version. But what I would do in the beginning is not ship directly to the App Store, but have internal releases. And we agreed on, and we found out that 2 weeks is like the optimal thing. Like we developed this release trains and we shipped every 2 weeks, but we found that saying no to internal stakeholders or other feature teams and saying like, no, if you can't make it to this release train, then please use the one in 4 weeks. That's very hard to negotiate, and you will have a hard time to fight with them, right? So we found that 2 weeks is okay, and also the review time is usually during the year. It's about 7 or 8 days, and when iOS 9 is there or iOS 8 was there, it was 14 days. So that has an impact, but you still could, like, if you begin doing it, then you could just use internal releases and download from test flight. But yeah, you can't really shorten the review times. So yeah.
Even with your Facebook?
I don't know. Let's ask them. I heard some things, but not publicly.
So not Facebook, but well, Yammer, we do weekly releases ourselves. Yes, the review process does get in the way, but at the end of the day, we just use that as an opportunity to just basically get our app through the QE process. So just make sure that any bugs are ironed out. So yes, the build might not hit the users' phones, but at least due diligence on our part.
Right, you get practice. Like that's the whole thing, right? Cool.
I have a question about humans. So you said remove all humans, or as much as possible.
Yeah, right. Remove humans, as not all humans.
Remove all humans. So my question is, in some cases, there's an entrenched way of doing things. We've talked about processes and stuff, and some people might not take super kindly to be removed from the process of submitting things to the App Store or something like that. So what would be your strategy to remove more humans from the process to shorten the feedback cycles?
Maybe if it's a technical person, he might apply to he might like math, so you can count the hours he's spending on something a computer could do in less time and have more time to browse YouTube, for example. Like that always helps. But like even if you remind people that they are doing unnecessary stuff and they could have a bigger impact, actually deal with stuff they would always wanted to do but are stuck in this thing where they have to do the same repetitive thing all the time. That's true. So yeah, it depends on your people skills, but I guess you could do that.